The desert sun had a way of draining color from the world. In Afghanistan, it turned the mountains into jagged shadows and the valleys into seas of dust. For weeks, the forward operating base had been buzzing with rumors. Insurgents were planning something big. A strike against the American supply convoys had kept the war machine moving. Every soldier knew the risk. For the combat controller assigned to Special Forces, risk wasn't an abstraction. It was her daily companion. She carried it like her rifle, heavy but familiar, always within arm's reach. She was 26 years old, with 6 years of service behind her. Most people back home might have described her as quiet, reserved even, but here she was the calmest voice in chaos. Radios crackled with static in her hands, and within seconds she could translate uncertainty into precise coordinates. Pilots trusted her. Infantry trusted her. She had earned that trust not with speeches or bravado, but with the steady reliability of someone who never let her people down. On that morning, the patrol assembled near the motor pool. Trucks lined up in formation, engines rumbling low. Soldiers checked weapons, adjusted straps, and muttered to each other in clipped, nervous jokes that didn't hide the edge in their voices. It was routine until it wasn't. She noticed details others might have missed. The weariness in a private's eyes, the way another soldier's hands trembled as he cleaned his weapon for the third time. Fear never disappeared. It just wore different masks. Her own gear weighed nearly 70 pounds. Radios, batteries, maps, medical kits, every item accounted for, because mistakes cost lives. She moved methodically, her fingers running across dials and cables, ensuring nothing would fail her in the field. She had a habit of speaking to herself quietly during these checks, repeating call signs, double-checking frequencies. Some of the younger soldiers watched her, reassured by her ritual. If she was calm, maybe they could be too. The mission briefing came quickly, delivered by their team leader. The objective was straightforward: move through a valley, scout potential ambush points, and mark safe passage for convoys that would follow. Straightforward never meant safe. Intelligence warned of insurgents in the area, likely preparing to strike. They had maps with circles drawn in red ink, places where attacks were most likely. It was like walking through a field where landmines might be hidden under every step, but this was their job. She listened, nodding, committing details to memory. Her role was clear: stay close to the center, protect the radio, be ready to call for help if contact occurred. To her, the mission wasn't just another assignment. It was another chance to make sure everyone came back alive. That thought fueled her focus more than medals or recognition ever could. Before rolling out, she took a moment to breathe. The air smelled of diesel and dust, a mixture that had become as familiar as rain back home. She thought briefly of her family, her father's voice on the phone during her last call, her mother's quiet pride, her younger brother asking what it felt like to be a hero. She never felt like one. Heroes were people in books, not soldiers who sometimes cried quietly at night when the day's weight pressed too hard. She shook the thought away. Dwelling on home distracted you. Out here, distraction killed. The convoy departed with a roar, dust plumes rising behind the vehicles. She sat in the back, headset pressed tight, scanning the frequencies. The roads outside the base grew narrow and treacherous, lined with crumbling walls and scattered debris. Afghan children sometimes waved as soldiers passed, though everyone knew those innocent faces could belong to families with divided loyalties. The uncertainty gnawed at soldiers. Trust was scarce in a war where danger could wear civilian clothes. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning rooftops, doorways, and ridgelines. Years of training sharpened her instincts, but she relied just as much on discipline. Her pulse stayed steady, even when the road twisted into areas notorious for ambushes. She keyed her mic, updating their position to higher command, her voice firm and composed. Pilots flying overhead listened for her call, ready to unleash support at a moment's notice. Inside the truck, soldiers sat in silence. The younger ones clutched rifles tight, their knuckles white. A sergeant across from her leaned back with forced nonchalance, though his eyes betrayed alertness. She offered a brief smile to one of the privates who kept glancing nervously at her gear. "We'll be fine," she said simply. It wasn't bravado. It was reassurance spoken by someone who had seen enough battles to know confidence mattered almost as much as bullets. As the convoy halted near the edge of the valley, the patrol dismounted. The mountains loomed around them, steep and unforgiving, with shadows that seemed to conceal unseen eyes. The ground crunched under boots as they spread out into formation. She adjusted her headset, feeling the familiar tug of wires and the weight of responsibility. This was where her role became critical. The team leader gave final orders. "Stay sharp, watch the ridges, keep spacing." She nodded, falling into position near the center, exactly where she was supposed to be. Around her, soldiers moved with practiced precision, rifles sweeping, eyes searching. Every sound carried weight, the rustle of wind, the distant bark of a dog, the metallic clink of gear. She felt the heaviness in the air, the kind of tension that soldiers recognized instinctively. Something was coming. Whether it would arrive in minutes or hours, no one knew. But she pushed the thought down, focusing on her responsibility. Her radio was alive with static and voices, a tether to unseen allies in the sky. If the worst happened, she would be ready. For now, she marched forward with the rest, boots pressing into the earth, dust rising with every step. She carried pain in her shoulders, weight on her back, and the knowledge that lives might soon depend on her. Yet she moved steadily, the quiet anchor of a patrol walking into danger. None of them could see the future, but she had already accepted the truth. The battlefield had no room for hesitation. Her duty was clear, and she would meet it head-on, whatever came. The sun climbed higher, baking the valley floor. Sweat ran down her back, mixing with the dust, but she ignored the discomfort. Every few minutes she checked her radio again, the act as natural as breathing. Ahead, the village appeared in the haze, mud brick walls and narrow alleys that could conceal anything. She knew from experience that the calm before violence was often the most deceptive. Her instincts told her the real test of this mission had not yet begun. And as she looked toward the horizon, heart steady, she prepared herself for the inevitable moment when preparation would end, and survival would demand everything she had. The hum of generators filled the briefing tent, blending with the muffled sounds of helicopters coming and going outside the wire. The heat inside was suffocating, a dry weight that clung to uniforms and dampened concentration. Soldiers fanned themselves with folded naps, sweat dripping from brows, yet no one complained. Every man and woman in that room knew the importance of the day's orders. She sat near the back, radio gear stacked beside her like an extension of her own body. Her hands rested on her knees, posture straight, eyes focused on the projector screen at the front. Her role in these gatherings was rarely to speak, but always to absorb every detail. One wrong digit in coordinates could mean calling fire on friendlies instead of the enemy. Lives hinged on her precision. The team leader stood in front, sleeves rolled high, pointing to a map riddled with circles and arrows. "This," he said, stabbing a finger at a narrow valley leading toward the village of Sanger, "is our problem. Intel suggests insurgents are moving supplies and fighters through here. Convoys are scheduled to pass this route in 48 hours. If it's not clear, those trucks won't make it. Our job is to walk the valley, identify ambush points, and mark safe passage." Murmurs rippled across the room. Everyone knew valleys like Sanger. Narrow choke points, perfect for hidden explosives, elevated ridgelines that made snipers kings, and villages where every door could conceal a rifle. She had walked enough of them to understand the dangers intimately. The intelligence officer switched the slide. Grainy drone images appeared, showing rooftops, fields, and faint trails of movement. "Activity here," he said, circling a cluster of compounds, indicates possible weapons caches. Reports from locals suggest fighters moved in last week. We can't confirm numbers, but estimate anywhere from 15 to 30. Expect small arms, RPGs, maybe mortar. No one shifted in their seats. Soldiers rarely reacted outwardly during briefings. But tension hung thick, an unspoken acknowledgement that patrols like this often turn bloody. The leader's voice hardened. Rules of engagement remain the same. Positive ID, before engaging, minimize civilian casualties. You'll have air on standby. Call sign Thunderhawk will be overhead for overwatch. If you make contact, you know who to call. His eyes scanned the room and landed on her. She gave a short nod. Everyone knew her radio wasn't just equipment. It was the unit's lifeline. After the briefing, soldiers filed out in pairs, muttering low, checking gear lists, preparing themselves mentally. She lingered a moment, committing the valley map to memory. Her eyes traced potential danger zones, rehearsing in her head where she might have to call fire if things went bad. Precision now meant speed later. And in combat, speed often meant survival. Outside, the sun glared white against the earth. The motor pool roared with activity vehicles being fueled, weapons checked, packs thrown into truck beds. The metallic clang of gear and the sharp smell of oil and gunpowder mixed in the air. It was the symphony of soldiers preparing for a patrol, a rhythm she had learned to find comfort in. She walked past the rows of vehicles, checking her radios again, each switch and dial touched with care. The headset fit snugly, the antenna angled properly. She spoke into the mic, testing clarity with the command post. Static hissed, and a crisp reply confirmed. Connection solid. She switched to the air support channel, testing again. Pilots responded with clipped professionalism, their voices calm even thousands of feet above. It was routine, but every routine mattered. A private, barely 20, approached nervously. His helmet strap dangled loose, rifle hanging awkwardly. He looked at her as if searching for reassurance. "Ma'am," he muttered, "you really think we'll see contact out there?" She studied him for a moment. His fear was raw, transparent. She remembered being that young once, when the thought of combat carried both dread and excitement. Now, after years of firefights, she felt only the weight of responsibility. "Plan for the worst," she answered steadily. "But trust your training. Stick to what you've drilled. And remember, none of us are out there alone." The private nodded quickly, adjusting his strap, shoulders straightening. Her words weren't much, but in moments like this, tone mattered more than detail. Soon, the order came to mount up. Engines revved, trucks rolled into formation. Dust rose in thick clouds as tires bit into the dirt. She climbed into her seat, gear heavy on her back, headset crackling alive with chatter. Her pulse remained steady, a practiced calm that came from knowing panic solved nothing. The convoy pushed out through the base gates, leaving behind the relative safety of concrete walls and guard towers. The world outside felt different, open, unpredictable, dangerous. Soldiers scanned every rooftop and alley, weapons ready. She kept her eyes on the horizon, but her mind worked elsewhere, running through call signs, frequencies, and fallback procedures. As the trucks rolled deeper into the valley, silence fell among the men. Even jokes, the nervous kind soldiers often used to ease tension, had stopped. Everyone felt the same tightening in their chest. Villages loomed in the distance, mud brick homes with windows like dark eyes. Children played by the road, some waving, others staring blankly. She waved back once, though her hand felt heavy. Trust was impossible here. A child's smile could mask a family hiding an IED trigger inside their home. Every bump in the road seemed to vibrate through her shattered focus, but she forced herself to remain alert. Her earpiece hissed with routine updates. Thunderhawk reporting no visible movement on ridgelines. Command post asking for position checks. She relayed each with clarity, her voice calm and professional. For the men around her, that voice was a lifeline. At one point, the convoy slowed to a crawl near a narrow pass. Soldiers dismounted, rifles sweeping. She followed, boots sinking into the dust. The valley walls rose steeply on either side, perfect ground for an ambush. Her radio hissed again, pilots warning of possible heat signatures farther ahead. She relayed the warning instantly. The team leader adjusted formation, eyes narrowing. The mission had barely begun, and tension was already thick enough to taste. Yet despite the danger, she found a strange clarity in these moments. Every sound sharpened, the crunch of gravel, the hiss of wind, the faint metallic clink of her gear. Every sense heightened. It was the edge of combat, the space between calm and catastrophe. She breathed slowly, steadying herself. The patrol pressed forward. The village drew closer, its alleys twisting like veins, its rooftops silent and watchful. Her gut told her the real test was still ahead. Missions like this always carried a deceptive calm, as if the land itself was holding its breath. She tightened her grip on the radio, eyes scanning the horizon. The mission briefing had been clear. Scout the valley, identify threats, mark the path for convoys. On paper, it sounded simple. But she knew better. Simplicity on paper never matched the reality of war. The day was just beginning. And somewhere ahead, hidden in shadow, the enemy was waiting. The valley had grown too quiet. The patrol moved cautiously, boots crunching over loose rock, rifles angled toward rooftops and ridgelines. She kept her eyes locked forward, one hand resting on the radio mic clipped to her vest. The sun had climbed high enough to bleach the sky white, casting hard shadows across the terrain. Sweat stung her eyes, but she ignored it. She knew the rhythm of patrol's long stretches of silence, punctuated by violence. The silence here felt heavy, unnatural, as though the earth itself waited to exhale. Her radio crackled with a pilot's voice overhead. Thunderhawk to ground. Negative movement observed. Area appears cold. Cold. It was the word soldiers wanted to hear. But cold didn't mean safe. She had been in valleys called cold before, only to watch them erupt into fire. The team pressed on. Children had vanished from the roadside. Women who usually carried water jugs or bundles of sticks were nowhere in sight. The absence felt louder than gunfire. She noticed it instantly, her stomach tightening. Locals often disappeared moments before attacks. Instinct screamed, but before she could speak, the world erupted. The blast hit like a thunderclap beneath her feet. 1 second she walked, the next she was airborne, weightless, body tossed like a rag doll. Heat and dust swallowed her senses. She slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, ears ringing so violently she thought she'd gone deaf. The ground trembled as debris rained down. Her first attempt to move sent pain so sharp it nearly blacked her out. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. She forced her eyes down and saw blood. Too much blood. Her legs both shattered, twisted at unnatural angles, uniform shredded. For a moment, her brain refused to process what she was seeing. Then the pain roared back, so overwhelming she could hardly breathe. Around her, chaos erupted. Soldiers screamed orders, weapons fired, dirt kicked up as insurgents opened fire from hidden positions. The IED had been the trigger. The ambush had begun. She tried to roll onto her stomach, but agony shot through her body, pulling a cry from her throat. Her vision blurred. She blinked furiously, dragging in shallow breaths. Training told her what to do: stop the bleeding, apply tourniquets, call for help. But her hands trembled, uncooperative. Every second that passed, her lifeblood poured into the dust. A medic skidded to her side, hands already working. "Hold still. Don't move," he shouted over the gunfire. His face was pale but steady as he wrapped tourniquets high on her thighs, twisting until the bleeding slowed. She clenched her teeth, fighting the urge to scream. She needed clarity, not panic. The team leader's voice roared across the chaos. "Contact left. Lay suppressing fire. Get her stable." Rifles cracked in controlled bursts, the squad forming a defensive perimeter around her. Bullets sparked against rocks, some snapping so close she could feel the shockwaves. Dust clouds mixed with acrid smoke from the explosion. She struggled to lift her head, to find her radio. Her lifeline wasn't in her hands. It had been flung meters away by the blast. Her heart raced. Without that radio, they had no air support. The enemy pressed hard, automatic fire rattling from multiple directions. She could see shadows darting on the ridges, muzzle flashes winking in the distance. The valley had become a kill zone. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled under the effort. The medic pressed her down. "Stay still. You'll bleed out." But she couldn't. Not now. Every fiber of her, being screamed at the radio, mattered more than her pain. If she couldn't reach it, 40 lives might be lost. Her ears picked up fragments of voices through the ringing. "We're pinned. We need air." A soldier shouted. Another yelled, "Ammo's running low." The panic in their tone cut deeper than her injuries. She had always been the one to steady them, the calm in the storm. Now she was broken, useless, lying in the dirt while her brothers fought for their lives. She forced herself onto her elbows. The world tilted, darkening at the edges, but she spotted it, the radio, half buried in dust, 20 meters ahead. It might as well have been a mile. She swallowed bile rising in her throat. 20 meters, with legs that no longer worked. Another explosion rocked the valley as insurgents lobbed an RPG. It slammed into the earth near one of the trucks, shrapnel flying. Soldiers dove for cover, screaming. The sound of the wounded joined the chorus of chaos. She felt her chest tighten. Time was running out. Her hand brushed the medic's shoulder. "I need the radio," she gasped. "You're not moving." He barked back, panic flickering in his eyes. She gripped his vest with surprising strength, pulling his face close. "If I don't get that radio, we all die. Cover me." For a second, he looked ready to argue. Then something in her expression silenced him. He nodded once, reluctantly, and returned to firing bursts over her head. She planted her elbows in the dirt, dragging herself forward. Agony seared her body with every movement, but she bit down hard on her lip, refusing to cry out. Blood smeared the ground behind her, marking her path. Bullets cracked overhead, dust spraying her face. She clawed forward, inch by inch, like a wounded animal refusing to surrender. Every meter was a battle. She could hear men shouting encouragement, voices strained with both fear and admiration. "Keep going." "Almost there." Someone yelled, but the distance stretched endlessly. Her body screamed for her to stop. Her legs felt like dead weight, her arms trembling from effort. The edges of her vision darkened again. She thought briefly of home, her mother's voice, her brother's laugh. She used the thought like fuel, dragging herself another meter, then another. The radio glinted in the dirt, just beyond reach. She stretched, fingers scraping the metal. A bullet struck the ground inches away, kicking dust into her face. She coughed, eyes stinging, but lunged again, finally closing her hand around it. Relief surged through her, almost enough to drown the pain. She collapsed against the ground, clutching the radio like a lifeline. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her face pale, but her eyes burned with determination. Around her, the fight raged on. Bullets flying, men shouting, enemies pressing harder. She pressed the mic to her lips. The world spun, but her voice came steady. "Thunderhawk, this is Reaper 2-1, she transmitted, her words cutting through the static. "Troops in contact. Immediate danger, close fire mission. Coordinates to follow." The valley had erupted in chaos. She was broken and bleeding, but her voice carried the power to change everything. And as she began relaying the numbers, precise even through fading consciousness, the tide of the battle started to turn. The radio crackled faintly in her hands, its weight heavier than her entire body. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one scraping against her lungs like sandpaper. Pain throbbed through her shattered legs, radiating in waves that made her vision pulse in and out of clarity. She wanted to close her eyes, just for a moment, but she knew that sleep would mean death not just for her, but for everyone around her. Gunfire still echoed through the valley. Insurgents poured automatic fire from hidden positions, rounds pinging off rocks and trucks. Dust clouds swirled in the air, thick with cordite and the metallic tang of blood. Her brothers fought desperately, returning fire with disciplined bursts, their shouts mixing with the whine of bullets. The patrol was outnumbered, pinned, and dangerously low on options. And the realization struck her with the force of another explosion. Without her, they would die. She pressed the radio mic close to her lips, forcing her voice into steady, clipped transmissions. "Thunderhawk, troops in contact. Multiple enemy positions. Danger close. Stand by for coordinates." Her words carried across the static, professional and calm, though her inside screamed in agony. She had been trained for this exact moment, and training overpowered panic. But as she began to call in coordinates, she realized the problem. The blast had knocked her farther from her original vantage point. She had only partial sight of the ridgeline, where muzzle flashes erupted. Precision was everything in her work. A mistake by even a few digits could rain death on her own people. She needed to move. Her stomach clenched. Move? Both of her legs were destroyed, shattered beyond recognition, held together only by tourniquets that pulsed with each beat of her weakening heart. Every instinct told her to stay down, conserve what little life remained. Yet her mind sharpened with ruthless clarity. Staying down meant the insurgents would eventually overwhelm them. Her team had no heavy support, no fallback. She was the only link to the sky. The medic crouched beside her again, eyes wide with fear and frustration. "You're bleeding out. You can't move. You'll kill yourself." She met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with something he couldn't quite understand, something between defiance and absolute certainty. "If I don't," she said hoarsely, "we all die here." The words cut through him like a blade. He opened his mouth and shut it again. Finally, he nodded, giving her the only thing she needed: space. She dragged in a breath, clenched her jaw, and shifted her weight forward. White-hot pain shot through her body, stealing the air from her lungs. She nearly collapsed, but her elbows dug into the dirt, pulling her inch by inch across the ground. The radio cord dragged behind her, wires tangling in the dust. The first few meters felt like eternity. Every pull tore fresh fire through her legs, the fabric of her uniform soaking darker with blood. She could hear bullets slapping into the dirt nearby, rocks shattering, soldiers shouting. Yet her world narrowed to the next few inches, the next desperate crawl forward. "Keep your head down," someone shouted. A burst of gunfire rattled overhead, close enough to shower her with fragments of stone. She didn't flinch. Fear had no place here. Duty was heavier than pain, heavier than bullets. She paused only to key the mic again, her voice strained but steady. "Thunderhawk, adjusting fire mission. Need eyes on ridge 2 clicks east. Confirm visual." The pilot's calm reply, "Visual confirmed, awaiting coordinates," was like oxygen. She couldn't afford to let them down. She dragged herself farther, forcing her broken body to obey. Her arms trembled, her palms blistering against the rough ground. Blood trailed behind her, a stark red line against the dust. But her willpower, honed by years of training and battles, refused to break. At 20 meters, she collapsed flat, chest heaving. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision. She bit her tongue hard enough to draw blood, shocking herself back to focus. She pictured her comrades' faces, the young private with trembling hands, the sergeant with weary eyes, the medic still fighting to keep her alive. If she gave up, none of them would see another sunrise. That thought alone lit a fire inside her. She crawled again, each movement a battle. Bullets snapped closer, enemy fighters realizing she was the one with the radio. She felt the dirt kick up around her, heard the hiss of rounds tearing through the air. Still she pressed forward, her voice hoarse as she barked fresh updates into the mic. Enemy fire intensifying. Coordinates updated. Standby strike package. At 50 meters, her strength faltered. She slumped, coughing, her body trembling violently. For a moment, despair clawed at her. What if she couldn't make it? What if her body finally gave in? Then she heard it one of her comrades yelling over the din. "We're holding because of you. Keep going." The words reignited her resolve. She clenched her fists, digging nails into her palms until pain jolted her back to life. She shoved herself forward again, crawling, dragging, clawing. Each inch cost more than the last, but she refused to stop. The world became a blur of pain, gunfire, and dust. Time lost meaning. All that existed was the crawl, the endless, brutal crawl. Her body broke with every movement, but her spirit refused to yield. Finally, after what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes, she reached a position with clearer sight of the ridgeline. She propped herself up on one elbow, lifted the radio, and relayed the exact coordinates with machine-like precision. Her voice never wavered. "Thunderhawk, danger close. Target grid follows. Fire mission immediate." The confirmation crackled back through the headset. She exhaled, relief flooding her veins. The worst was not over, but the tide had begun to shift. For a brief second, she allowed herself to rest her cheek against the dirt, eyes fluttering shut. Around her, the firefight raged on, but she had done the unthinkable, dragged herself through hell to give her team a chance. In that moment, broken and bleeding, she realized the truth. Her body was destroyed, but her will remained unshakable. And as long as she could breathe, she would fight, not for glory, not for medals, but for the lives of the brothers who trusted her completely. The battle for the valley was only beginning. But she had made the decision that mattered most. She had chosen to crawl forward when everything in her screamed to give up. And that choice would save them all. The ground beneath her palms was hot, gritty, and slick with her own blood. Dust clung to her skin, mixing with sweat and forming dark streaks across her face. Every nerve in her body screamed. Every movement sent jolts of fire through her shattered legs, but she pushed forward anyway. She had no choice. Her team's survival depended on this crawl. Gunfire rattled in relentless bursts around her, echoing through the valley like rolling thunder. Enemy fighters were closing in, their silhouettes darting across ridgelines, firing down with merciless intent. She heard the angry chatter of machine guns, felt the concussive blasts of mortar slamming into the earth. Somewhere behind her, soldiers were shouting orders, returning fire, trying desperately to hold the line. She wanted to look back, to reassure herself they were still alive, but she couldn't afford the distraction. Her focus was forward. Always forward. The radio pressed against her side, heavy and awkward. Its cord tangled in the rocks, snagging at every opportunity, as if the earth itself wanted to hold her down. She yanked it free each time, teeth gritted, lips drawn back in a snarl of determination. Nothing would stop her, not dirt, not shrapnel, not even the fact that her body was falling apart. Her arms trembled under the strain. She wasn't built for this kind of crawl, no one was. She used her elbows to drag herself forward, every pull tearing at her muscles, every shove digging her body deeper into the unforgiving ground. The rocks sliced her palms raw, the edges jagged enough to split skin. Her uniform shredded against the terrain, fabric tearing, skin peeling open beneath it. But she didn't slow. At 20 meters, she gasped, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gulps. Her chest burned as though it had been pierced by knives. Blood soaked through her bandages, spreading in dark pools beneath her. She was leaving a trail any blind man could follow, a crimson line leading straight to her position. The insurgents must have seen it by now. She knew it was only a matter of time before they aimed directly at her. A sudden crack split the air, a bullet slammed into the dirt inches from her face, showering her with fragments. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Fear would only waste precious energy. She pressed her body lower to the ground, almost hugging the earth, and kept moving. Inch by inch. Breath by breath. Keep crawling, she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't even encouragement. It was a command, issued with the same cold authority she used on the radio. Orders had to be followed, even if they came from within. Her comrades shouted in the background. Covering fire. Suppress the ridge. Their rifles barked furiously, cutting through the din of battle. She knew they were buying her time, putting their own lives at risk so she could finish her mission. That knowledge was heavier than any pain she carried. She had to succeed for them. 50 meters. Her vision blurred. The edges of the world darkened, tunneling into a narrow corridor of dust and blood. She blinked hard, forcing clarity back. She couldn't pass out, not now. If she lost consciousness, if she let go for even a second, 40 men would die in this valley. That truth lashed her mind like a whip, forcing her forward. She dug her elbows deep into the ground, pulling again. Her body jolted violently, pain roaring through her like wildfire. Her jaw clenched so hard she thought her teeth might crack. She bit down on the agony, swallowing it, using it as fuel. Pain wasn't her enemy. It was proof she was still alive, still capable of moving, still capable of saving them. 70 meters. Her arms quivered on the verge of collapse. She dragged one hand forward, then the other, then pushed with everything she had left. The motion was slow, pitifully slow, but it carried her forward. A bullet tore through the dirt to her left. Another whined past her ear, close enough to leave a stinging burn on her cheek. She ignored them both. Her crawl had become a rhythm: pain, drag, breath. Pain, drag, breath. At 90 meters, she collapsed. Her chest heaved, and the radio slipped from her grasp. She clawed at it desperately, pulling it back to her side. Tears stung her eyes, hot and unbidden, but not from fear. They came from sheer exhaustion, the breaking point of a body pushed far past its limits. She wanted to stop. God, she wanted to stop. But she didn't. A voice rang out in her memory, sharp and steady, her instructor from training, barking at her during endless drills. The mission doesn't care about your pain. The mission only cares that it's done. She forced her body forward again. 100 meters. The world dissolved into a haze of gunfire and grit. She felt her arms locking, muscles screaming for relief, but she ignored them. She moved on instinct now, no longer conscious of the crawl itself, only of the absolute need to continue. 150 meters. Her comrades were shouting louder, their fire more frantic. She sensed the enemy pressing closer, relentless in their attempt to crush the patrol. But she also sensed something else, the shift in momentum. Air support was circling overhead, awaiting her coordinates. If she could just reach the vantage point, if she could just give the command, the battle would turn. 200 meters. She collapsed again, her body shaking violently. This was it, the point where everything inside her screamed for surrender. She could taste iron on her tongue, hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Her vision darkened to almost nothing. But then she thought of their faces, the young private from Texas, barely 20 years old, the sergeant with a wife and newborn waiting at home, the medic still kneeling in the dust, fighting for her life even as she fought for theirs. She thought of the oath she had taken, the flag stitched onto her uniform, the belief that no sacrifice was too great if it meant saving others. And somehow, impossibly, she crawled the last few feet. She reached the small rise of rock she'd aimed for and collapsed behind it, her chest pressed against the earth. With shaking hands, she raised the radio to her lips. Her voice was barely a rasp, but it carried the weight of steel. Thunderhawk, coordinates confirmed. Fire mission danger close. Bring it down, Static hissed. Then the pilot's reply came through clear and steady. Roger. Ordnance inbound. She closed her eyes, tears mixing with dust on her face. For the first time since the explosion, she allowed herself a moment of relief. She had made it. Against every impossible odd, she had crawled 200 meters through fire and blood to deliver the call that would save them all. Her body was broken. Her blood soaked the earth, but her spirit remained unshattered. And in that valley, under that merciless sky, she proved that willpower could move mountains or crawl through them when everything else had failed. Her body was failing, but her mind had never been sharper. Propped against the jagged rock, radio clutched in trembling hands, she pressed the mouthpiece tight against her lips. Static hissed like a living thing in her ear, each crackle threatening to drown her voice. Her lungs ached with every breath. Blood still poured from wounds she refused to acknowledge, yet her words were steady when she spoke. This is Talon 1, confirming coordinates. Grid. She rattled off the numbers with mechanical precision, her voice clipped and professional, betraying none of the chaos surrounding her. Her training had carved these procedures so deeply into her bones that not even death could erase them. Gunfire echoed across the valley. Her brothers shouted, their voices raw with strain, as they unleashed controlled bursts toward the ridgeline. She heard the medic yelling for more bandages, heard the sergeant calling for suppressive fire, but all of it blurred into background noise. The only sound that mattered was the pilot's reply. Copy, Talon 1. Coordinates received. Danger close acknowledged. Ordnance on standby. Danger close. The words hung heavy in the air. She knew what it meant. The strike would land mere meters from friendly positions. One mistake, one wrong digit, one waver in her tired voice, and the bombs would fall on her own people. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let hesitation creep in. There was no room for doubt. Confirm target ridge, she said, her eyes fixed on the enemy muzzle flashes sparking like fireflies across the slope. East side, fortified trench line. Hostile squad massing. Target confirmed, came the calm voice from above. You are cleared to adjust final bearing. She took a long, slow breath. her vision blurred, spots of darkness flickering at the edges. She blinked them away. Every second counted. Every detail mattered. She steadied her shaking hands against the ground, forcing her body to obey one last time. "Adjust 5 degrees west," she said. "Bring it in tight. Mark my smoke." She fumbled for a flare in her vest, fingers slick with blood. It took 3 tries to pull the pin, her strength nearly gone. With a final heave, she tossed the canister a few meters out. Bright orange smoke hissed into the air, curling against the wind, marking the line between life and death. "Visual on smoke," the pilot confirmed. "Weapons hot." The seconds stretched into eternity. She pressed her forehead into the dirt, whispering a prayer she didn't fully remember. Around her, the fight grew more desperate. Enemy gunfire intensified, their shouts echoing as they pressed their assault. She heard a cry of pain from one of her own, the sound twisting a knife in her gut. She wanted to look, wanted to help, but she couldn't afford to break focus. Her job wasn't to fire a rifle. It was to bring the sky crashing down on the enemy. Then it came. The roar of engines overhead split the sky, so loud it drowned out everything else. Her comrades looked up, relief flickering across their dirt-streaked faces. A shadow streaked across the valley, fast and merciless. She clutched the radio, her lips moving on instinct. Cleared hot. Cleared hot. The world erupted. A deafening blast tore through the ridgeline, shaking the ground like an earthquake. Heat slammed into her face, dust and debris raining from the heavens. The shockwave rattled her teeth, pressed the air from her lungs. She coughed violently, choking on dirt and smoke, but her heart surged with grim satisfaction. Screams echoed from the enemy position, cut short by a second explosion. Fire blossomed along the ridge, black smoke curling high into the air. The insurgents who had moments ago fired with confidence were now scrambling, broken and panicked, their ambush reduced to chaos. Direct hit. One of her comrades shouted over the thunder. "You got them." She keyed the mic again, voice hoarse but steady. "Thunderhawk, adjust 200 meters east. Target secondary position." "Roger," the pilot replied. Rolling in. Another pass screamed overhead. Bombs fell, the earth convulsed again, and the valley lit with fire. Stones and dirt pelted her helmet, the air thick with choking smoke. Yet even as her body sagged with exhaustion, she lifted the radio once more. Coordinates spilled from her lips with unyielding precision, guiding steel and fire with the clarity of a surgeon. Her comrades cheered between bursts of gunfire, their morale surging with each strike. Where minutes ago they had been pinned and desperate, now they advanced, rifles barking with renewed confidence. The tide of battle was turning. Still, she couldn't rest. Not yet. Her vision narrowed, her breath shallow. Her hands shook so violently, she had to grip the radio with both just to keep it steady. She tasted blood on her tongue, her body screaming for release. But her mind, her will, was iron. "Thunderhawk," she croaked. "One more run. Sweep the ridge clean. Copy, Talon 1, last run inbound. Hold on down there." She let the radio drop to her chest for a moment, her arms too heavy to lift. Around her, the valley thundered with the final barrage. Fire consumed the enemy stronghold, a storm of metal and fury, ending the ambush in a matter of seconds. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of survivors and the distant whine of retreating engines. The battle was over. She lay there trembling, the radio still buzzing faintly. Her comrades moved cautiously through the smoke, securing the perimeter, checking for survivors. Some called out her name, their voices breaking when they saw her crumpled form near the rocks. The medic rushed to her side, hands already pulling supplies from his pack. "You did it," he whispered, his voice tight with awe as he pressed fresh gauze against her wounds. "You crazy stubborn. You actually did it." Her lips curled into the faintest of smiles, though her eyes remained closed. Every ounce of her strength had been poured into those calls. Every last fragment of her will burned to ash. Yet she had succeeded. 40 lives had been saved because she refused to give up. Her voice, barely audible, rasped against the medic's ear. "Tell them. It was the airstrike. Not me." But he shook his head fiercely. "No, it was you." As the adrenaline drained from her body, she drifted on the edge of unconsciousness. The valley around her was quiet now, the air heavy with smoke and the smell of burning earth. She let herself breathe just once, with something close to peace. The job was done. And though she didn't know if she would live to see another sunrise, she knew she had fulfilled her duty to the very last breath. The valley fell eerily silent after the thunder of explosions. Smoke hung thick over the terrain, curling in lazy columns into the blinding sky. Bits of earth, rock, and debris lay scattered like remnants of a nightmare. The enemy's ambush had been annihilated in moments, reduced to chaos and ruin by her precise, almost impossible radio calls. But for those who survived the immediate hell, the danger was far from over. She lay there, body shredded and trembling, chest heaving with shallow breaths. The heat of the day was gone, replaced by the burning ache of muscles on fire, skin scorched and bleeding. Her shattered legs throbbed in tandem, a constant reminder of the IED that had changed everything in seconds. Every movement sent jagged pain coursing through her body, and yet, somehow, she remained conscious, eyes open just enough to see the unfolding scene around her. Her comrades were moving cautiously, rifles scanning every ridge and building, checking for lingering threats. Shouts of relief and encouragement echoed across the valley as soldiers regrouped, heads turning to confirm that the injured were still alive. When they found her lying near the rocks, the medic's face went pale for a split second before twisting into determination. "You made it," he said, voice low but urgent. "We've got to move you now before any secondary devices go off." They worked quickly, wrapping her in a stretcher that felt like it might collapse under her weight. She didn't speak, didn't protest. Her mind was numbed from the adrenaline, the blood loss, and the sheer exhaustion of having dragged herself 200 meters across open fire to call in an airstrike that saved 40 lives. Words would fail to capture what had happened here. Actions had spoken instead. The sergeant knelt beside her, hand gripping hers through the rough fabric of her bloodied uniform. "You saved all of us," he said. His eyes were wet, something rare for a hardened soldier. "Do you hear me? Every single one of us is alive because of you." She closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. Relief, exhaustion, pain, pride, guilt. The cocktail of emotions nearly overpowered her, but she held on to consciousness. She had done her job. She had saved lives. But at what cost? The helicopter arrived moments later, skimming dust and debris as the rotors tore the air into chaos. She felt the vibration through her bones as the team lifted her into the medical bay, straps holding her in place. Inside, the world turned sterile and cold, a sharp contrast to the sun-blasted valley outside. Beeping monitors, the sharp scent of antiseptics, the quiet hum of machinery. Here, life and death were balanced on careful hands. Medics worked around her with precision, cleaning wounds, stabilizing broken limbs, checking vitals. She could feel the pain in every movement, but the blur of their efficiency kept her focused. Her mind floated between consciousness and near unconsciousness, fragments of the valley replaying in her mind. The crack of the IED, the roar of gunfire, the flash of orange smoke rising like a beacon. A young private leaned over, voice barely audible. "Ma'am, You really crawled 200 meters? Through that? She let out a hollow laugh, more a rasp than sound. Had to, didn't I? Her words fell short of the magnitude of what she had done. 200 meters through mud, dust, blood, and bullets. Crawling inch by inch to call in the firepower that would save them all. She thought of her team, of the frightened faces of the young soldiers who had depended on her focus and skill. Somehow, through sheer will, she had delivered. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, it was impossible to tell. The valley outside had been secured, and reinforcements had begun sweeping the area for remaining threats. She lay on the gurney, surrounded by machines and medics, the weight of what she had endured pressing down on her. Her chest ached from the strain of dragging her body. Her arms burned from exertion. Her mind, though, remained unbroken. A team gathered around in quiet moments, kneeling or standing nearby. They didn't speak much. Words seemed inadequate. Eyes met hers with gratitude and awe, the kind that could not be expressed through any speech. Every one of them knew what she had endured. Every one of them understood that her heroism had saved their lives. The silence was heavy with respect and relief. The medic leaned closer, checking her vitals again. "We're getting you stabilized. You're going to be okay," he said, though the truth of the moment hung in balance. Her legs were shattered, and recovery would be long, painful, and uncertain. But for now, she had survived. She had survived the impossible. She let herself drift, imagining the valley as it had been before the ambush, the orange smoke marking the line between life and death. 40 men alive because of a radio, a crawl, and the refusal to give up. She let that thought carry her briefly into peace. But the weight of the trauma was already pressing at the edges of her consciousness. The screams, the fire, the smell of blood and dust, the unrelenting tension, it would not vanish easily. Even as the medics moved quickly, working to save her, the images of the ambush replayed endlessly in her mind. She had seen death close, heard it, smelled it. She had touched it and fought against it with every ounce of herself. Her team stayed close, their presence grounding her. One of the soldiers, usually quiet and reserved, clutched her hand. "We're going home," he said. "You're going home." She nodded weakly. There were tears now, warm against the dry dust of her skin, mixing with blood and sweat. Relief and grief mingled together in a strange harmony. She had survived. They had survived. And yet, the valley had left its mark on every soul that had walked through it that day. As the helicopter lifted from the makeshift landing zone, she stared out the window at the valley below. Smoke still curled from the ridgeline. The ground was littered with the remnants of battle-shattered vehicles, spent shells, scorched earth. She knew she would never forget this place, never forget the weight of the decision she had made to crawl through fire, to call in the strike that had saved so many. The flight to the field hospital was quiet, the hum of the rotors underscoring the fragile calm after the storm. Medics monitored vitals, administered fluids, and whispered encouragement. Each beep of the monitors was a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting, still capable of more than even she had imagined. Her eyes closed finally, exhaustion overtaking pain. She allowed herself a single thought. She had given everything, and it had been enough. Not for glory, not for medals, but for the 40 lives that still had a chance to see another day, because she refused to give up. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and fatigue, a quiet resolve began to form. She had survived hell on earth, and whatever came next, she would meet it with the same unwavering will that had carried her across that valley. The hum of medical equipment was constant, a low, steady reminder that she was alive. She lay in a hospital bed, both legs encased in casts, monitors beeping in rhythm with her heartbeat. The sterile smell of antiseptics and hospital linen filled her nostrils, and the steady stream of nurses and doctors moved around her like a tide. Every touch was precise, every motion deliberate, as if the medical team were performing a ritual to wrest life back from the valley that had tried to claim it. The first days were a blur of pain, medication, and exhaustion. Her body throbbed with residual injuries, fractured bones, deep lacerations, bruised ribs, and the lingering ache of muscle trauma from dragging herself 200 meters through a battlefield. Sleep came in fragmented waves, often interrupted by nightmares, the valley ablaze, gunfire ripping through the air, the terrified faces of her teammates. She woke, heart racing, every muscle screaming, only to realize she was still in a hospital bed. The contrast between the war-torn valley and the sterile calm of the hospital was jarring, yet she clung to it like a lifeline. The rehabilitation process began slowly. Physical therapists arrived daily, urging movement, guiding her through exercises that were agony incarnate. She clenched her fists through each motion, tears spilling unbidden, yet she refused to give up. Every extension, every bend, every attempt to regain even a fraction of mobility was a victory. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Family and friends visited sporadically, their faces masks of relief, worry, and pride. Her mother's hand shook in hers as she whispered, "You're here. You made it." Her father's eyes, usually stern, were red, glimmering with the weight of unspoken words. She nodded faintly, swallowing the lump in her throat. Words felt insufficient, incapable of capturing the magnitude of what she had endured, of what she had accomplished. As weeks passed, news of her actions spread. Soldiers she had saved reached out, some cautiously, others with raw, trembling gratitude. Emails, letters, and messages described the impact of her decision, the life and death calculations made in the valley. She read them quietly, tears mixing with smiles. 40 lives, 40 people, still breathing because she refused to stop crawling, refused to let fear dictate her actions. Public recognition came next. Military officials arrived, their presence formal and deliberate. They presented medals and citations, each word spoken weighed with solemnity and reverence. She accepted them quietly, acknowledging the honor, but never fully embracing it. Her thoughts returned instinctively to the valley, the heat of the sun, the sting of dust in her eyes, the way her blood had mixed with dirt as she dragged herself forward. The medals were symbolic, but the reality of her courage lived in memory, in the muscles that ached, and in the lives she had saved. During therapy, she began speaking about the experience in measured doses. Initially, words were scarce. Descriptions were clinical, stripped of emotional embellishment. But over time, as she regained strength, she spoke more openly, recounting the crawl, the radio calls, the moments where pain and fear collided. Every retelling was cathartic, each listener absorbing the enormity of her actions. Fellow soldiers listened in awe, civilians listened in disbelief, and she realized that the story had power beyond survival. It inspired. Nightmares persisted, though. A valley haunted her dreams. Explosions, gunfire, cries of the wounded. She awoke sweating, shaking, but slowly she learned to cope. Therapy sessions included not just physical recovery, but psychological resilience, guiding her to reconcile the trauma with the heroism. She realized that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And she had acted, relentlessly, heroically, selflessly. Months into rehabilitation, she returned to light duties, visiting bases, speaking to units, teaching about situational awareness, radio operations, and the importance of courage under fire. Her lectures weren't just tactical, they were lessons in determination, in refusing to yield when the world demanded surrender. Soldiers listened with rapt attention, absorbing both technical skill, and the demonstration of sheer willpower. She had transformed from a soldier into a living testament to perseverance. Her reflection, however, was deeply personal. Late at night, in quiet hospital rooms or empty barracks, she revisited the moments of the valley, the crawl, the blast, the decision to push forward despite every injury. She acknowledged fear, recognized pain, and faced the fragility of life. And in those reflections, she found something profound: purpose. The valley had tested her, stripped her to the bones of her being, and left her not broken, but reshaped. Years later, she would tell the story differently. To some, it would sound like heroism, almost mythic. To others, simply fact. But in her mind, it would always remain a sequence of choices made under impossible pressure. She remembered each bullet, each step, each agonizing inch of the crawl. She remembered the roar of the airstrike and the silence afterward. Most importantly, she remembered the faces of the soldiers whose lives had been spared because she refused to stop. She learned that recovery wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and mental. Each scar, each twinge of pain, each moment of weakness reminded her that survival was both a gift and a responsibility. She found solace in knowing that her actions had tangible consequences, that courage, even in its rawest, most painful form, could shape life itself. The medals on her chest were symbols, but the truth of her journey lived in the invisible threads of the lives she had touched. She walked carefully now, leaning on canes at first, and moving with more confidence as rehabilitation continued. Every step was a reminder of the valley, of the fire, of the radio that had connected her to the sky. Every step was a testament to the unyielding human spirit. In quiet moments, she allowed herself to feel pride, though she tempered it with humility. She had survived impossible odds, yet she knew that heroism was never solitary. It existed in collaboration, in the courage of others, in the moments where fear was acknowledged but ignored for the sake of life. She had been one part of a collective effort, yet her actions had been the pivot on which the lives of 40 men turned. Eventually, she returned home, greeted by family, friends, and community. The world beyond the military base celebrated her bravery, but she understood the weight of that celebration. It wasn't about accolades. It was about what she had learned, what she had endured, and what she had accomplished against forces that sought to destroy. She reflected often, understanding that the valley would remain a permanent part of her identity. It was both a source of trauma and a wellspring of strength. The crawl, the call, the explosions, they were memories she carried not as burdens, but as proof of what was possible when willpower and duty converged. And though she had lost the use of her legs as they had been, though pain would remain a constant companion, she had gained something far greater, the knowledge that courage could be measured not in comfort or safety, but in the act of moving forward when every instinct screamed to stop. In the quiet evenings, she often sat by a window, watching the world outside, reflecting on the impossibility of what she had survived. 40 lives lived, 40 families intact, 40 futures untouched by the ambush that could have claimed them. And all because she had chosen to crawl, to call, to endure. Her story became legend within her unit, and beyond, not for fame, not for medals, but because it embodied a truth that soldiers, civilians, and ordinary people could understand, that when the stakes are life and death, the human spirit can achieve the impossible. She had crawled 200 meters through fire, blood, and unimaginable pain. She had called in the airstrike that saved 40 lives. And through every agonizing inch, she had discovered a deeper understanding of what it meant to fight, to survive, and to serve. The valley was behind her, but its lessons would remain forever. She had survived. She had endured. And in doing so, she had defined courage in its purest form.